Greetings, everybody. Grateful for you all taking the time to join me today. Just on a very human level, no matter your profession, so many of us are parents, partners, brothers, sisters, fathers, mothers, sons and daughters, friends. And I know how hard this is for all of you, all of us, myself included. Few of us could have anticipated days as difficult as these, a year like we just went through, and the beginning of a new one as challenging as it has been. But I want to assure all of you that we are resolute, we are emboldened, and we will persevere. We will do so by calling upon our better angels, our braver angels, and we will succeed. Even on days and hours when it seems like we won't. And I want to start by just reflecting on the past week. 1 week ago today, a beautiful Wednesday here in Washington, I walked to work as I usually do, a 15-minute walk to the Capitol. Seeing the dome every morning is a beacon, as it would be, of course, for anybody and all of you. And there were some people milling about who clearly were there to protest. None of us could have imagined the horrors that would ensue. I watched the president's speech, I should say first. I recognized the potential consequences as I walked over to the House chamber for the proceedings to affirm the Electoral College results of the recent election. My family, my daughters, sent me news reports of unrest outside of the Capitol. One of my colleagues and I, Tom Malinowski, left the gallery of the House chamber to have a look out the window, and we saw hundreds, perhaps low thousands gathering. We saw bicycle rack perimeters with just a handful of Capitol Police trying to defend them. And we both knew at that moment that this was going to get very difficult. We consulted with a Capitol Police officer whom we know, saw in the hallway. She assured us that this was the United States Capitol. It was secure, it would be defended. But by the time we got back to the chamber just minutes later, the speaker, the majority leader, of course, were very physically whisked away by the Secret Service. We continued the proceeding for just a few moments before a Capitol Police officer came on the PA system, screamed that we immediately take cover under our chairs on the floor, that we activate our gas masks that are placed under every seat in the House chamber. We started hearing the banging. They then announced that banging on the doors, we heard that the insurgents were on their way to the chamber to be prepared. They slammed the doors shut. They put furniture in front of them. We heard the ruckus. Prayers were issued. And I encouraged my Democratic colleagues with whom I was sitting on the Democratic side of the House to immediately run with me to the other side, to the Republican side of the chamber, because clearly there was reason to believe that those who were coming to cause harm would be focused on Democrats. And in so doing, I came to the very stark and extraordinary, indelible conclusion that while we could all change the side of the House floor that we were sitting on or running to, that I was among colleagues who could not change the color of their skin, no matter what. And another of my colleagues, a military veteran, screamed at everybody, remove your pins, the pins that we wear on our lapel to indicate that we're members of Congress. And I came to the conclusion quickly thereafter too, that for some, that was the only thing that would save their life, perhaps. I say that only because in those extraordinarily terrifying moments, all of us can have a moment of epiphany. I surely did. And I'm going to use that moment of fear, resolution, and recognition to illuminate my way forward in Congress. Of course, we all escaped without harm. 5 people lost their lives either the day of or in ensuing days. What transpired is something that I hope never will again. It never should have occurred. And I will do everything I can to ensure it never does. When I walked to work today, it was very different. I chose the same path, But what had been the Capitol complex, an accessible, the beacon of democracy for the whole world, enjoyed by every American to walk right up to, is now essentially a military base, defended with multiple perimeters, with significant equipment, defensive mechanisms. There are troops milling about. Troops are sleeping in the very United States Capitol that they have not done so since 1861, since the Civil War. Members of Congress now walk through a metal detector to reach the House floor, which, as many of you journalists know, caused quite a stir last night amongst some of our Republican colleagues. It's a different place, it's a different time, but it's also one that I hope we take note of and use as a wake-up call. These past 4 years have been a challenge. These past days, this past week has been a horror. And I believe, I'm optimistic, I'm hopeful that it will serve as the wake-up call we needed, this whole country, to recognize the fragility of democracy, even of the United States of America. But with that, I do want to turn it over to you, and I just want to say that today we will be impeaching the President of the United States for the second time in his term. I do so with solemnity, with sobriety, and with intention, because those who are calling for unity, with which I agree, must be reminded that without accountability, we cannot have unity. Without consequence and without the rule of law, we have no America. And I am very resolute to fulfill my oath to the Constitution and ensure the preservation of our republic. I will be joined by a number of Republicans, all Democrats as far as I know, and maybe even the United States Senate. And at that point, we can begin the arduous but important work of repair and rehabilitation and a re-recognition of what does connect us all and does unify us all, and that is the love of our country. So with that, I thank you all for being with us. I want to ensure that we take as much time as possible for your questions. And with that, Brian, I will turn it back to you and we can begin that.
Yes, we will start with Esme Murphy with WCCO. Esme, I am unmuting you right now. Hold on one moment.
Thank you very much, Congressman Phillips, for taking my question. My question is this: is the expected vote to impeach the president later this afternoon in any way diminished by the fact that it's really unclear if the Senate will take any action at all?
Esme, our role in such proceedings is very clear. We will impeach today, I believe, with many Republican colleagues. Esme, I do wish to read the statement of Liz Cheney, who is the #3 Republican in the House leadership ranks, who wrote last night, "The President of the United States summoned this mob, assembled the mob, and lit the flame of this attack. Everything that followed was his doing. None of this would have happened without the president. The president could have immediately and forcefully intervened to stop the violence. He did not. There has never been a greater betrayal by the President of the United States of this office and his oath to the Constitution. Therefore, I will vote to impeach the president." I say that, Esme, because that shows that this actually strangely and importantly is becoming a unifying mission to impeach him for inciting insurrection. And even as you probably are aware, the majority leader, Mitch McConnell in the Senate, has even indicated, at least privately, that he concurs and likely will proceed with the trial expeditiously. It is out of our hands what the Senate does. It is not our responsibility. What our responsibility is the initiation of it. It starts in the people's house, and that's what we intend to do. But I do expect the Senate, I do expect that we will transmit the article on which we will be voting expeditiously, immediately. And I do expect the Senate to take it up. And I would not be surprised at all if a number of Republicans in the Senate join together to fulfill their oath to the Constitution.
Thanks, Dean. Tom Hauser with KTSB.
Hello, Congressman. Good to see you in Washington last week and to talk to you again today. Are there any concerns among Democrats about potential overreach? There's a lot of energy, obviously, now and a lot of anger, but in the long term, any concern about overreach, either at the ballot box in 2 years or in the short term, riling up these same people who committed the violence last week, now that they feel the walls closing in on them? President Trump being impeached again, a lot of conservatives being knocked off social media. Any concern about any kind of potential backlash?
Tom, I speak for many when I express that our concerns are not about overreach, they're concerns about underreach. We've seen the consequences of underreach as exhibited by last Wednesday. Ill preparedness, 4 years of inciting, spreading of disinformation, and downright lying. I think it was Senator Romney, Republican Senator Romney, said the other day that the most important job we can do for constituents is tell the truth. That's what I'm concerned about, Tom, is the dissemination of truth. This is not an issue between conservatives and liberals. This is an issue between those who wish to overthrow the duly elected United States government and those who do not, those who stand by the Constitution and those who do not, those who believe that it is incumbent on all Americans to disagree without being disagreeable. As Ronald Reagan, I believe, said, peace is not the absence of conflict, it's the ability to cope with conflict by peaceful means. Those who believe that we need to use respect, the rule of law and principle, and not bullets and bombs. That's what we're concerned about. That is where the division is. It is not between Democrats and Republicans, because principled Democrats and Republicans are actually unified right now in the recognition that we have this obligation. If we start foregoing our responsibility to the Constitution, Tom, it becomes a very slippery slope. It doesn't matter if it's on day one of a president's term or on day 1453 or whatever it might be today. That responsibility continues. And as I said earlier, and I will continue to repeat emphatically, we cannot have unity without accountability. Conservative principles, accountability and consequence, in which I deeply believe. I think it unifies Americans, and that's exactly what we need to do. And then recognize that we do have a unifying attribute here in America, and that is love of country. And I hope people take a step back and recognize we must place that above all else.
As a quick follow-up, Congressman, any concern about overshadowing the first weeks or maybe even months of the Joe Biden administration and the work that needs to be done on battling the coronavirus?
Tom, well, first of all, I've told you many times, many of you on this Zoom, that Congress doesn't operate as efficiently, as effectively, and expeditiously as it needs to. But when pressed, we can do more than one thing at one time. Of course, I would rather see the Biden administration begin with a clean slate, a hopeful slate, an optimistic slate, and most importantly, fulfill our mutual responsibility, Democrats and Republicans, to ensure the security of Americans, the safety of Americans, and the health of Americans, and to work on another COVID relief bill, to work on an infrastructure bill, and most importantly, to repair the country. Of course, I have those concerns, but this is not a job in which we can allow concerns to interfere with responsibility. And as I said earlier, I have read, I have reread, I have studied, I've done my soul searching relative to the Constitution, and this is so clear, Tom, to me and so many others, about our task. Does it come with consequence? It may, to personal safety, to political careers, but it does not forego what we are supposed to do in the face of what our founders feared more than anything else, and that is domestic insurrection. And that's what our task is. That's the task in front of us. It is not easy. It is not enviable by any stretch, but it is a duty, and that's why I'm here.
Mary Lahammer with TPT. You're up next.
Hello, Mary.
Hello, Representative Phillips. Could you talk? Oh, I think I was muted. Hello. I think you got me.
Yeah.
Could you tell us about the intelligence and briefings that you may be getting in terms of threats the next week and how safe you feel throughout the next week there at the U.S. Capitol?
Well, Mary, I will say that when I decided to run for Congress after the 2016 election, in no small part because of my daughters who inspired me that night to do something, and I made a promise to them. I knew that this would come with a consequence of potential harm to personal safety and otherwise. And of course, never have I felt that intensity of concern as I do right now, but I'm emboldened. I will not let that stand in the way of my responsibilities. And to answer your question, the intelligence briefings that we have received in just the last 48 hours are the most chilling, horrifying, and frankly, unbelievable accounts that any of us who've received them, Democrats and Republicans, have ever received on our soil. The FBI, as you're probably all aware, classified what they had been receiving, the chatter and some of the threats, as quote unquote potential war. That is exactly what it is. I don't want to sugarcoat the realities. We have very heavily armed militia from all around the country who have been coordinating, who have been planning, and worst of all, have been incited by the president and others, including some of my colleagues. And the threats are real. There are multiple threats. There are many thousands of potential armed militia, men and women, making their way to Washington, perhaps right now as we speak. Those are the realities.
Could I, sorry, interject? And the other part of the question about your safety, and do you feel like enough improvements in light of the failures? I'm sorry, they might have muted me. Sorry, I don't know if you heard the follow-up. If you're confident that there were enough improvements.
No, I don't feel safe. Not at all. I don't think there's a member of Congress that would say they do. But I'm focusing more on the resolution to do our jobs and not let fear. We talk so often about not letting foreign terrorists change our behavior, because if they do, they win. And there is it is analogous to the circumstance we have in our country right now. We will not let domestic terrorists dictate how we operate. We will fill our responsibility. The day that they attacked the United States Capitol, the insurgents, the day of the insurrection, the day of the siege, we went back to the House chamber, the same one essentially at the door of which a woman was killed trying to enter hours before. We fulfilled our constitutional responsibility to affirm the election at 3:42 in the morning. That is exactly what we will continue to do today, tomorrow, the next day, so help me God. And no, I do not feel safe. And yes, I'm taking steps to enhance my safety and security, as is every single member of Congress. It is a sad time. It is a horrifying reality, but it is what we face. And I will accept what will come, and I will tolerate the fear because I find it emboldening and makes me resolute. But I would be lying to you if any of us said we felt safe.
Thank you.
Sarah Meerhoff with Forum News Service. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello, Sarah.
Hi, Representative. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. We've seen a lot of comparisons over the past week of what happened on Wednesday to some of the racial justice protests over the summer. And I'm wondering your take on that and the potential political motivations behind those comparisons.
I think those comparisons are false equivalencies. I think they're shameful, and any reasonable person looking at objective information, not mis or disinformation, would come to the same conclusion that I have. What happened on Wednesday was a siege, an insurrection, sedition, an attack on the United States Capitol. And therefore, every single thing that provides the foundation, the place that provides the foundation for our entire democracy. Without it, we do not have Democrats or Republicans. It was an attack, it was an insurrection, and it was a siege. Organized by a mob, incited by a president of the United States of America. That, I believe, is fairly clear. People can have differing opinions of the genesis of violence during the summer riots, but I remind all of you that the genesis, in my estimation, was relative to inequity, injustice, and many years and generations of its tolerance. I believe that the facts would back me up on this, that most of the worst violence of the burning in Minneapolis, a lot of it, if not most, was not caused by those who were protesting those injustices. I think it is politically shameful to somehow equate the two and say, what about? Violence against any human being in this country is disgusting. Burning of a building in protest is disgusting. And attacking the United States Capitol above all else is reprehensible. And every single person that does so, no matter what their spirit, no matter what their cause, who would cause harm upon another American or attack our Capitol, has got to be held to account and prosecuted under the law to the fullest extent possible, plain and simple. And I want to thank Sarah. I want to make sure to thank the millions of men and women around the country who don a uniform and a badge every day to protect us. Those overwhelmingly principled, honorable people who show valor every single day, many of whom I saw in action at the time that we were under attack on Wednesday. Many of them, by the way, men and women of color, one of whom, of course, who may be credited appropriately with saving the United States senators who were literally feet away from the mob. That is quite a juxtaposition of this summer and what happened on Wednesday. And the reason I shared with you my story about recognizing what privilege really means is a very important part of my message today. I've always cared about it. I thought I've always recognized it. I've always cared about treating people with respect and decency, no matter how you pray or what the color of your skin might be or what you eat or what you think. But I'll tell you, that left an indelible mark on me. And anybody who would try to say what about or what, how can you say they're not the same, is just simply on the wrong side of history. And most importantly, equally importantly, on the wrong side of fact. And that is how I feel.
Theo Keith with Fox 9, you're up next.
Hi, Congressman. You mentioned, you in fact quoted Liz Cheney earlier. However, I'd like to ask you about the Minnesota delegation specifically, and whether you are disappointed that for a second straight impeachment, the Minnesota delegation will split exactly along party lines.
You know, Theo, I have to say, I'm not going to speak for them. I encourage them to take a hard look at their oath to office. Today's got hard look, a rereading of the Constitution. If they come to a different conclusion than I, that will be reflected in history. Am I disappointed? Of course I am. I wrote today and posted on Twitter that I take no exception to opposing opinions, only to corrupted principles. And I do believe, Theo, what I'm seeing right now amongst some of those with whom I serve is a corruption of the very principles to which they've taken an oath, to which they have built their careers on. And I call on them to take heed. I will not say anything more than history and ultimately voters, I suppose, but history, perhaps most importantly, and posterity will be the judge of how they proceed, along with every single one of my colleagues who will pull out his or her voting card later today. It's as simple as that. This is not about politics. This is not about positioning oneself, I should hope, for the next election, if you will. This is about consequence, and this is about accountability, and this is about principle. And that is how I'm looking at it, and that is how so many of my courageous Republican colleagues are looking at it, starting with Liz Cheney and the many others who will be joining her at great political risk, at great risk to themselves, even to their families, in standing on the right side of history, on the side of justice, on the side of fact. And I want to salute them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Max Nestorak at the Reformer. You're live, Max.
Hello,
Hi,
Max.
Congressman. Thank you for taking my question. Can you tell me where is the Problem Solvers Caucus on impeachment? And just to follow up to your question, can you say more about what you mean by a corruption of principles and where that comes from?
Max, the Problem Solvers Caucus has been, remains the most important time I spend in Congress, because it is the only space and place at which Democrats and Republicans sit down at a table of relative trust and respect and talk about the issues facing the country and resolve to find paths forward. Are we always successful? Of course not. Do we always come up with the right solution? No. But we do commit to at least having conversations, and that in no small part, I believe, will be the antidote to how we repair and rehabilitate the country. With all that said, Max, has it caused me consternation to know that some of my Republican colleagues on the Problem Solvers Caucus signed on to the amicus brief? Yes, or voted to object to the certification of justly elected electoral college slates from our 50 states? Yes. Have I considered leaving the caucus because of that gap in perspective? Yes. But I made a commitment to my voters, to my constituents, I should say, to those who voted for me, and even to those who did not vote for me, that I would be a bridge builder, that I would be respectful, that I would be a listener, and that above all else, I would set aside perspective in the spirit of progress. And that means working with people. And that's what I continue to intend to do. We have taken steps, Max, in the last 48 hours. I'm now a vice chair of our Problem Solvers Caucus. I want to salute the fact that the overwhelming majority of our Republican members did not sign on to the amicus brief and did vote to certify the election. I'm proud of that. We have taken steps in the last 48 hours to use every channel available to us, every lever available to us, every relationship available to us to encourage the President of the United States, perhaps the one person in the entire world who still has the ability and the time to prevent bloodshed, whether it be on the 17th, on the 20th, or beyond. That work requires cooperation. So I intend to continue to do so, but I will confess with consternation and challenge. But I also believe that we, the Problem Solvers Caucus, will be the foundation for a rehabilitation and repair. And that is what I'm contemplating as we move forward. To your question about corrupted principles, principles are foundational. Principles, I believe, American principles are shared. If we did not have them, unifying American principles, we would not have a country. And we certainly would not have been able to maintain our republic for over 2 centuries. But when it comes to accountability and consequence, those are clearly principles that I believe are shared by all Americans and certainly by all Democrats and Republicans. And for many who have espoused those principles for so many years, who have demanded accountability and demanded consequence for those who should break the law, they're very quiet right now. So when I talk about corrupted principles, somehow they've been corrupted. Some way they've been corrupted. Someone has corrupted them. I will not opine on who specifically or what may have transpired, but looking through the lens of objectivity, I believe very sincerely that the principles that had been unifying up until last week are suddenly corrupted. And some of my colleagues still have some hours, maybe a few, until we pull out our voting cards and determine which way we'll vote, either to hold the president to account and ensure there is some consequence, even albeit a minor one at this stage, or nothing at all. And I say one more thing, Max. I ask any of you on this call to reflect back to 9/11, to reflect back to the Oklahoma City bombing, and look at the record and see, were there any Democrats or Republicans who said that we should not hold to account those who would incite terrorism, who would promote terrorism, who would even condone terrorism? Should we not hold them to account for the fear of more division? I don't think so. And that's why I asked for the reflection on principle. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to get through this, and I know we will, it will be based on the restoration of those principles. And that's why I'm afraid some have been corrupted.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. We have a few more minutes here. I wanted to open the floor again in the chat box. Just let me know your outlet and name outlet and that you have a question, and I'll make it happen.
I do want to say to everybody too, on this subject of, I sense, there are questions about, do we proceed down a path of accountability or do we proceed down a path of unification? I don't consider those to be mutually exclusive. To the contrary, sedition is divisive. Insurrection is divisive. Breaking the law is divisive. Accountability is unifying. And as you write your articles, as you reflect on today's events, as you reflect on the future, I ask you to take that into account and give it consideration, please. The fact that accountability is unifying. For if we do not have accountability, what do we have?
Thank you, everyone. Seeing, it looks like Esme Murphy has a question. Hold on one moment. Esme?
Yeah, Congressman, thank you. I just had a question about all the people that still believe that this election was stolen. The people who stormed the Capitol, many of them really, I think, believe that that had happened. And they continue to believe that, I believe. What do you say to those people, and how concerned are you about that?
I'm terribly concerned, Esme. And the fact is, to answer your question very directly, the people to whom you refer have been lied to. They've been lied to consistently, passionately, and regularly by the President of the United States, Donald Trump, and a lot of my colleagues in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate who have enabled it. One truth that I must share is that the only fraud that has been perpetrated on the American public is by those who continue to spread this big lie. History will surely recognize that. The question is, will we recognize it now and over the coming days and over the coming months? I do not shame those who have been susceptible to the lies. I do not shame those who have been believers of the lies. I shame those who have corrupted the Constitution and their offices in choosing to do so for their own personal office and egos. And if we are going to emerge from this, Steve Hartman of CBS, Esme, I believe said, I think I said this earlier, the soul of America cannot be ransacked and the answers to what ail us are not under a dome. It's spot on. We can't legislate compassion. We can't legislate truth. We can't legislate love. We can't legislate respect. And we can't legislate unity. But we can all make a decision to open our ears, open our eyes, open our minds, and open our hearts, and at least begin listening a little bit more to other points of view, other sources of information, so that we all become a little bit more enlightened. And I say that to those who believe that the election was stolen, to those who still believe in Donald Trump. I ask you to simply broaden your sources of information, give it thought, give it reflection, consume a little bit more broadly. And to those like me, who believe that the election was conducted appropriately, especially in light of COVID, who believe in the legitimate election of Joe Biden, who do not believe in the lies that are being disseminated and the disinformation, we have the same responsibility to listen to tens of millions of Americans who feel so angry, so disenfranchised, so disgusted with Washington, that they will continue to support Donald Trump because of his promise to disrupt it all and to give them voice. We should reflect on that. We too need to listen to those who do not see things the same way we might, perceive things the same way we might, and have the same worldview we might have ourselves. It's a mutual responsibility. And I'm glad you asked that question, Esme, because I do believe that is the antidote. It is the only antidote. No president, no matter how principled and unifying he or she might be, can overcome the challenge we face. It's going to come from the very people who are contemplating taking up arms, to take pause, reflect on what they're taking up arms for, and recognize that we can better achieve that end by the pen, the voice, and the ears. And that is my message, and that is my invitation, and that is what I will pursue. And I invite all of you to join me. Thank you.
We have one final question from Max of the Reformer as a follow-up, and then we will be ending.
I just want to ask if you had talked to either Representative Fischbach or Representative Hagedorn about their vote against certifying the election results, and if you think they believe that the election was stolen.
Max, you'll have to ask them. No, I have not spoken with either of them about it. I cannot opine on why they did so, nor can I share with you how they might be feeling about today. That's a question you'll have to ask them.
Thanks.
Thank you, everybody. To leave on a hopeful note, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you, journalists, for what you do. God bless you for what you do, for sharing truth, whether it's consumed or not. It is important to everybody else participating. I want you to leave this conversation with confidence that there are a lot of good people here still who care much more deeply about the country and its future and its security and safety than their politics or their careers or even their lives. I'm among them. And I thank you. I'm proud to be a Minnesotan. I'm proud to represent the very community that raised me, taught me the very principles and values that I intend to have in mind and execute with my voting card this afternoon. So Godspeed, everybody, and keep the faith. We're going to persevere. Thank you.